What are the top 10 decks post Fire King structure deck? Make sure you guys smash the crap out of that subscribe button so you guys don't miss out more. I was going to starting things off over here is going to be actually Fire Kings themselves. Now, they are kind of low on the list right now. It's not to say that they can't consistently get results, but this is all pretty populous. Like, let's be honest, for December, you do have to be aware that this deck is going to kind of be a little bit of a menace and be something that you are going to have to worry about as an inconvenience. But a lot of players will be playing this. I honestly think representation is going to be a lot greater than I think people are kind of hoping or expecting to see at the very beginning stages before it eventually rockets off of the ground and turns into a little bit more of a problem per se out here. So yes, Fire King's going to be a massively relevant deck, but its overall like top 16 data proved that it was a very strong competitor. It's like number 5 in terms of top 16, but in top 8 numbers from Kongs. It didn't place as strongly as a lot of other things. Next up is Infernal. Yes, the Warrior Toolbox, and Double Charlemagne, the Angel's Ring Negate, some of the slightly stronger things that you're kind of expecting to see out here with this deck. This tied with 4 other decks for the tied with 5 other decks. So basically everything from this point on is going to be in the same like number. So what is that, 9 through 5? You'll be able to see the interchangeability of these. So there's not a lot to really say about Infernal. I feel like the deck does its huge combo play. It does play cross out for the purely matchup, which does actually help it overcome some of the slightly more annoying things that it could actually have going for it. So I do like that. Like, the deck's overall grind game feels a little bit non-existent at some points, though, but really strong competitor. And then we have Labyrinth. Until Transaction Rollback comes out, I think this deck is going to have some problems. Now, once we get Transaction Rollback, you're going to see Labyrinth probably explode into another dimension, because resolving all of the big welcome labyrinths in the world that you could actually want does turn this deck into a slightly bigger pain in the butt problem. And I think everybody in the room right now is kind of fully aware of what's coming down the path for that. So for the time being, though, Labyrinth is kind of riding that little mid area. It's not to say that this build cannot win. All right, everything here in the top 10 can win an event. All right, that's why I think this top 10 is a lot different than previous top 10s that we've seen. Is all of these can do well. Like, Yu-Gi-Oh's done a fairly good job balancing out the power scaling between all of these. So I think that's a lot to keep in mind here. Next up is going to be Dragon Link. Yes, surprisingly, Dragon Link has found its place in the format. Finally, we can see this build actually doing something. And I'm actually extremely happy about that, man. Like, it took Dragon Link so long to figure out, the perfect amount of, cards. I think that the 43 to 44 card builds were probably the most successful. And surprisingly, surprise, Dragon Link is still a viable deck in the format. At least. We'll have to wait and see how that changes, though, in the future. But the TCG absolutely loves watching Dragon Link, kind of stand up to the format and, contend to do the things that it does. So we'll have to wait and see. I think there's a lot more to really be had with this kind of going forward. And then, surprise on this, we have Branded, but it's not the Runic Chimera version, actually. This was actually a really big surprise to see, that because Branded was so quiet for so long, except, being played with the, the Chimera good stuff. But the pure build has kind of started to wake back up right now. And that means that, I guess we're going to start saying that Branded needed time to kind of figure out what it wanted to do, much like Dragon Link, yes. And I think we're going to continue to see that be a trend kind of going forward here. Both Dragon Link and Branded are going to need time to kind of figure out where they need to be in the format. While they always look like very safe picks to go into a format with, I think that you're going to need to be very patient when giving some consideration to, which of the section of decks you want to play down here, especially with that in mind. And our last one of this block is actually Mana Diem. I really want to put Mana Diem and Infernal kind of in like the same classification of deck, because they're just combo up. One ends on Angel Ring, one ends on, Reframed. Then you have Dissipator Baron. The other build has Double Charlemagne. It's end on some sort of negates after doing a relatively large combo board, and that's kind of it. Obviously I think Cross Shape into the big Vices fusion monster to attempt to end the game is probably the scariest thing. Shroud is probably the scariest thing that the deck actually does have going for it, because that thing gets huge. I think a lot of people kind of tend to forget that a Shroud is that big powerhouse that is meant to end the game very quickly as, you're trying to close things out. So kind of keep in mind here that you are seeing, Mana Diem do its strong thing. So that wraps up that block. Next up is Purely. Purely's sitting in that awkward place between like the not so good tier 1 decks and then like the top of the block tier 1 here. And it's fine that Purely sits in this section, because like, while you would think that the deck isn't that strong right now because everybody's playing, thrust into the Herald to clean up, whatever the cat is trying to do out here, the deck, it has such a good mid-range of things that it's able to do. It's actually kind of insane. Also, I always like to point the finger at that draw combo. You watch that deck start snowballing out that massive draw engine, and it gets very, very interesting out here. So yes, that is Purely. I'm not all that surprised, are you? Now, your next 3 decks are honestly, I feel like they're tied in terms of representation. So we're going to start off with Rescue Ace here. Rescue Ace is the fearful set the huge board and laugh at your opponent. Now, interestingly enough, I think this deck has had the most high-end success out of like the YCS grind, which actually is kind of interesting when you're kind of painting the picture for, what we've been seeing out here with the meta. And it was also the Boogeyman deck. Like, the set 4 scares so many decks, but because, and not everybody is jumping on the Rescue Ace train right now, because there are a lot of other options available kind of to play around with right now. So putting this deck is one of the 3 best decks in the room. Absolutely. All right, like, it is everything that you expect to see when you're looking at these types of representations, because the deck is just, it's a monster. And then we have Tier Elements. As long as this deck has the high roll capability to mill out the most resources it could ever want, yeah, it's gonna. I do hate to say that, like, the RNG does reward you. All right, and that's I think the stupidest part about the deck is you start to turbo through everything. You're like, oh, okay, this will be fine, and then you just suddenly, either they hit the nuts now that they have the Horus package. Now they can get to the Vampire, or the big rank 8, and try to turbo even more. A little extra 4 cards isn't that scary, but it does attempt to add up. I know that this deck does have some struggling matchups, so does Rescue Ace, but it's called what it is. It is a member of the big 3 in terms of representation. Tier players absolutely love this deck, but it's nowhere near the unbeatable level that it once was, which I think is the saving grace to it right now. And actually kind of edging out just a little bit over these 2 is actually Unchained. Honestly, Unchained, Tier, and Rescue Ace all do fit the same category. But when I was looking at data keeping for this event, there was one extra Unchained that kind of just had an extra top 8 showing out of nowhere. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. You are seeing Unchained kind of sitting out here, and it does play ignorant to a lot of things. Like, the deck is kind of the rogue killer at this point. I think it's one of the things that does make the deck, a little bit scarier than some of the other metas. If your rogue matchup's strong, you have 10 rogue decks that are going to be coming up here in a second in another video that are going to be things that you do need to be aware of. So keep that in mind. Let's pass on over, to the rogue decks you'll be seeing tomorrow.
Patrons!
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Check out these other videos.